So before we get into the Wolves draft itself, a draft, by the way, I think many would say would make Rick Spielman blush after all the wheeling and dealing that took place. Let's start at the top. I was told Jabari Smith was a lock to go number one of the Orlando Magic, but they start out the night with the old switcheroo for Duke's Paolo Banchero. Chet Holmgren, 2 to the Thunder. Jabari Smith drops 3 to the Houston Rockets. Keegan Murray, Jaden Ivey round out the top 5. I know this draft was known for being strong at the top, but let's face it, it's rare to find the next LeBron or D-Wade or even a Zion Williamson. What's the ceiling of some of these top guys in your opinion? Like in the NFL draft, it's always waiting for the next Andrew Luck to come out as a prospect. Where do you see some of these top guys rank in years past in your opinion? Like would Paolo or Chet go first or second if they were in last year's class, for example?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I tend to find that if there's a year where there's no consensus around the number one pick, usually that player is not a future superstar, typically. I know, the Anthony Edwards year, for instance, most people were pretty sold that Anthony Edwards was the number one guy. That was another top-heavy draft. But the fact that we got to the moments before the first pick, and we didn't know who was going to be. It was going to be Chet, going to be Paolo, it was going to be Jabari. Turns out being the Duke kid. And that's not to say he's not going to be a good player. He very well might be. But a lot of times when there's no consensus, it's hard to say that any of them are going to be flat-out superstars. Now, I think Chet's uniqueness makes him probably the highest upside in this draft because, I mean, you look at other kind of rail-thin prospects who could, move around and shoot, and you think about Kevin Durant, and you think about, Kristaps Porzingis, you think about Giannis Antetokounmpo, and look at how much stronger those guys got during their careers. And even, KD never became a strong player necessarily, but strong for his leanness and the ability to shoot supersedes any lack of strength that he might have. And Chet has that. Chet has handles. Chet has blocking ability. Chet has range. I think Chet's got a lot of upside. And Ron and I were talking on our show about how fun it would have been for the Magic to team Chet up with his former high school teammate Jalen Suggs and build something big in Orlando with two guys who were like best buddies. I'm sad they didn't do that, but they think they've got something in Paolo Banchero. And obviously, that's probably huge for the Rockets to have Jabari Smith, a potential number one pick, fall into their lap at number 3. So I think everybody probably walks away feeling pretty good about who they got because any one of those 3 could have been considered a top pick.
Yeah, gonna be fun to watch them develop their talents over the next few years. So the Wolves were on the clock at 19. E.J. Liddell from Ohio State, still on the board at the time, a name ESPN mock drafts had tied to the Wolves leading up through the pre-draft process. He doesn't end up going to the second round, by the way. But before we get to their pick, the actual pick they finished the night with, who were you hoping for? Who was the top player on your board you were banging the table for the Wolves? When the Vikes were on the clock with the 12th pick and Kyle Hamilton was still on the board, I was screaming at my TV. But was there a player you really liked that was still available when they were on the clock?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Liddell because Ron and I actually talked about how we liked him a lot on our show. And when I looked at him, I thought of Al Horford, and maybe it's just because Al Horford is front of mind after watching the finals and the Celtics, but a guy that is super tough, has a little bit of range, is not going to back down from anybody, going to be able to score around the basket, just a pure power forward. I thought that he kind of fit that bill. Maybe, play a little 3, play a little 4. I would have loved to have him, and unfortunately, the Wolves could have taken him in the second round. At number 40, and they traded that pick, moved back again in the second, and then he ended up going number 41. So he was available, and I guess in retrospect, taking him at 19 or 22 would have been a reach based on where he went. But that was a player I liked. I also liked the Serbian kid Jovic, Nikola Jovic. One constant different from Jokic, same country. Similar skills, not as strong as Jokic certainly at this point, but again, a guy that has range, has an opportunity to grow into his frame and maybe be that kind of unicorn that just can do everything. And I thought that would have been a really intriguing piece, especially when the Wolves had 2 picks in that first round. To use one of them on a bit of an international flyer would have been interesting. But now we can get into the guys they took. I think that you can always second guess, but you're not going to know the answer to your second guess for about 3 years down the road. And the Wolves did get a couple guys that I think might be able to contribute right away. So at least for 2022-23, the Wolves might actually see some immediate dividends. They just might not see the superstardom of some of these other guys that inevitably one or two of them will become.
All right, you just mentioned it. Let's get to the goods. The Wolves' actual draft picks. So they end up drafting Jake LaRavia from Wake Forest at 19. They trade him for the 22nd pick and land Walker Kessler from Auburn. Sam, not known for being a deep dive basketball guy. Here's what I know about him. Tall, long, over 7 feet, without the Air Jordans on, and was the defensive player of the year. Gotta love that. Wolves get a true center and some serious size, something I think a lot of fans were hoping for they would get this offseason. They lacked with Karl Towns and Naz Reid manning the middle last year. What else can you tell us about Kessler, and how does he change what the Wolves want to do on the court? Like, what kind of new flexibility and versatility will they have when Kessler's in the game?
Yeah, well, Wolves definitely took a step forward defensively last year, but they were not all the way there. They've still got a lot of work to do. Karl-Anthony Towns has been much maligned for his defense. He often melts against some of those bigger fives, and this gives the Wolves the opportunity to put Cat at the 4 position, the power forward, and have Walker Kessler be the spot center. When he comes in, probably not for a ton of minutes per game. He's definitely a bench guy at first, but to have him play 15 minutes and give Cat either a rest or knock him over to that smaller position will allow that just big natural body to block shots and D guys up in the post. SEC Defensive Player of the Year, big-time shot blocker, like 19% block rate or something that Ben Beacon told us on Ron's show. So that's going to be his calling card immediately. And if that's your baseline, if you're going to be a fierce defender in the post, I think that's great. That's great for a role player, for a niche player. Doesn't seem like he's super refined on offense. I mean, we saw a couple of years ago for the Golden Gophers when they brought in Liam Robbins from Drake. For 1 year, he was a 7-footer. And I think that Walker Kessler is a fairly similar kind of player. 7 feet, a little bit lumbering, not necessarily a lot of natural athleticism, not necessarily a lot of shooting ability from the outside. He tried 53s last year and made 10. And that's it with a shorter three-point line. So to say that he's going to come in and be a spread-the-floor kind of guy, no. But if he was drafted in 2002 instead of 2022, probably would have been more highly regarded, right, Luke? Because at that time, the big men lived in the paint. They lived in that 15-foot radius around the basket. Now everyone expects them, if he can't shoot, he's not a modern big man. I think he can still do good things, though. And if he's doing that in 15 minutes per game kind of role, I think he can be useful right away because you can't duplicate that kind of size. And Naz Reid certainly is giving you a lot of effort, and he does give you the shooting, but he doesn't give you that natural size, 7'5" wingspan that Kessler has. So I can see him being on the floor on a game-by-game basis, and in the right matchup, he might be extremely useful. And if Towns is in foul trouble, now you have someone you can trust to go in for him for those minutes.
Yeah, a lot of good points there. Wolves wheeled and dealed all night. They ended up drafting 3 more players, giving up 3 future 2s. They got back 2 future 2s. Of the 3 players they drafted after Kessler, what sticks out and who excites you the most?
It's got to be Wendell Moore Jr. I couldn't pick out the 2 they selected in the second round if you showed them to me next to Abraham Lincoln. So let's just talk about Wendell Moore from Duke. Obviously, someone we watched a lot of in March Madness. He was part of that amazing Duke draft class this year, part of their Final Four run when they lost to UNC. But Wendell Moore, if you look at his stats year over year, this is not a one-and-done guy, and I think that's good. That means he can probably contribute a little more early for the Wolves. He's 20 years old. He's played 3 years of college ball. His three-point percentage improved about 10% every year, from 20 to 30 to 41 last year. His assists improved. His rebounding improved. He just came into his own as a junior, and I think everybody's kind of labeling him 3-and-D. He's going to spread the floor. He's going to shoot the rock. And he's going to be able to defend a couple of different positions. And that's what the modern player represents. So if Walker Kessler is a throwback, Wendell Moore is the future kind of player. And that's someone that like a Jalen Noel, you're trying to look for a little instant offense coming off the bench. That's what Wendell Moore gives you. the Wolves didn't have an incredible amount of like guard depth coming off the bench last year. You know, Josh Okogie wasn't really in the coach's favor. McKinley Wright never played. They weren't that deep of a team, and now I think that with Wendell Moore, once he refines a little bit, I think he's going to be able to come in and be sort of that microwave shooter who you can just turn the heat on, and he can give you a few points here and there.
Yeah, a lot of good points there as well. I always think it's interesting and kind of fun to see the next day after the draft, the dust settles, to see how the NBA futures finals lines move at all. You can check all that on Bet Online. Bet Online is the #1 source for all your betting needs. Get all the latest stats, news, and info on Bet Online. Check out betonline.com today. That's betonline.com. So last one here as we wrap up. Wolves draft, it's over. We head into free agency next week. There was a lot of speculation about the possibility of moving DAngelo Russell in that monster contract. Now that the dust is settled from draft night, knowing the players the Wolves have added, how do you think this D'Lo situation shapes out when it's all said and done, if you had to guess? And is there any more likelihood he's moved now that the draft is over?
Yeah, I think the likelihood decreases that he's moved because now, you're no longer able to either give your assets to another team or they're not going to give you assets for this draft. And that matters a lot. That when the Wolves got Jimmy Butler, the draft capital of that draft night was pretty important in that trade. So to say that he's more likely, certainly not. He's less likely to be dealt, but it's not impossible either. I mean, you can still trade future picks. You can still, come up with the right package of players. Maybe there might be another team looking to dump expiring contracts on your plate. The problem is with that's not really useful to the Wolves because the Wolves are not a team in sell mode. That's the issue with having a pseudo superstar in the last year of his deal and you still want to be competitive. The Wolves are probably better with D'Lo than they are with a bunch of spare parts. So you don't want to ship his contract off unless you are freeing up a bunch of money that you can play with in free agency or getting a player of his caliber in return. So now that you don't get like a premium draft piece for this year in exchange for him, there's probably fewer scenarios where teams are going to be able to give you what you want. And if you keep D'Lo, then you're at where you were last year or better. I think the Wolves have the ability with this current core to probably be a top 5 seed in the West. They last year, had they not had that COVID stretch where everybody got sick, they could have been a 50-win team easily. And they could have been a much higher seed. So I think that they're fine with D'Lo. It's just that you hate to see someone of his trade value just walk off into free agency and get nothing for him. And that's what they could be looking at down the road. But it might be worth it to be super competitive this year with him. And then you kind of have to ask, too, where's his head at? He obviously hears the rumors. He knows that this team might be shopping him. Is he going to play for them as well as he has? And will his disgruntlement, to make up a word, have an impact on that locker room?
Yeah, a lot to think about there. A lot of different factors. Going to be very interesting nonetheless, and probably a little dramatic to follow Mike Conley and his new game plan heading into free agency again next week, and all the rumors swirling around DAngelo Russell. Rest assured, we'll be here to break it all down.